Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Britt Clark, and I am the DEC Operations Manager, and I am here to support you in any way you can today, any way I can today, and to welcome our presenters today, Kathy Anderson, Laura Godfrey, Anna Paulson, and Danelle Gornaris will be presenting the session, My Child Has a Hearing Loss, Now What? Family and Practitioner Resources. So thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you to our presenters, and I will hand it over to you all.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kathy Anderson, and I too am very happy that you've joined us today. Thank you for sharing this time with our session. I work for the Minnesota Low Incidence Projects as the statewide early hearing detection and intervention specialist. And I am very, very happy and very privileged to work alongside my co-presenters and partners in support of early hearing detection and intervention, or EHDI, services in Minnesota for children and families. So you're going to hear from each of these presenters today, Laura, Danelle, and Anna, as they describe some of their part of our collaborative project here in Minnesota. There we go. As we start today, I wanted to just reflect and share about our statewide goal. When we look at those high expectations that we always want to keep in front of us as we work with children and families, this statement was put together several years ago by the early childhood subgroup of the Minnesota Collaborative Plan. You'll hear about that a little bit more from Anna a little bit later in the presentation. But I do think it's important for us to take that time now and just lay that foundation of what we are holding ourselves to as a goal as a state in Minnesota. That is, our goal for all young children who have hearing loss will maximize their communication and learning potential, regardless of the degree of their hearing loss. And they'll be able to begin kindergarten with communication, social, and early literacy skills at a developmental level similar to that of their typically developing hearing peers, or to the maximum extent appropriate for the individual child. And the second part of that is all families will receive the supports that they need to help their children develop and learn. So as we go through our presentation, that's in front of our minds and our services as well. We are not able to see you all today through this virtual conference, but we do want to know who's here with us today and a little bit about you. So we're going to put up the first poll. If you could let us know your primary role in services to children and families, we would really appreciate that. We'll take just a few more seconds and then we'll go on to another poll. So I see we have some ECSE, Early Childhood Special Ed teachers, program administrators, and audiologists with us in this conference today. Thank you. All right. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to bring up another poll. We'll close that one out. We'd like to know a little bit about how you feel your experiences have been, how much experience you've had with EHDI or with serving children and families who have hearing loss. Whether it's none, this is all really new, a little bit, quite a bit, or a lot. You're a parent, maybe you're a service provider. you teaching others to see who our participants are today. Okay, thank you for sharing that. It looks like we have most people are a little bit or quite a bit. You've attended some workshops and done some professional reading. For some couple of people, it's really new. So thank you for coming. And those of you who are very experienced, please feel free to share in the chat, answer questions, and help others as well as we talk through this presentation today. Okay, I'm going to close that. I'm just going to take a minute for Laura and Anna to see if anyone wrote into the chat comments beforehand about why they're here today and what do you hope to learn. Are there some comments that are reflective of many people who shared in the chat?
This is Laura. No comments yet.
Okay. All right. Well, then feel free to add, and I hope that we are meeting your needs as we talk today too. I'm going to go on to say, then why are we here? We really wanted to share with you and have a conversation with each other as well on some goals for how are we serving children with hearing loss and their families, and also how our organizations are supportive. So there's some systems information that we're sharing and some resources for children and families. So we came up with, we have 4 areas that we're going to focus on today. The first area is some of those critical topic areas of information that parents, families of young children really need to know about. So having that list of topics and available resources to support that. Another part of it, of our presentation, is information about the ways in which our Minnesota partner EHDI organizations and agencies support families. So we'll talk a little bit about those collaborative efforts at a state system level. Another area that we're sharing today are information resources. We have lots of resources that we've included in the PowerPoint and also in a separate handout. So we've got all of the links to resources that we're going to share today all in one document that you can take away with you afterwards and explore more. And then the final area is really going to be to encourage you to select at least 2 information resources that you would like to perhaps share, borrow, develop something similar, with some next steps for you. If you think of these last 2 slides, so we've got some icons, a topic icon, a collaboration icon, a resources, tools icon, and a choice icon, that next steps box of which one am I going to do next. You're going to see these icons pop up on the slides throughout the presentation up at the top right corner. So if you see those icons, you'll know, oh, well, there's information on this slide about resources for practitioners or for parents or both. When you see that little hand making a choices, those to remind you of thinking about what could be my next steps in this area. So we hope that'll help organize our thoughts. As we start today, I wanted to share just a couple reminders and a little bit of background as context to our services and supports and our presentation today. Just that awareness of keeping in mind that children may present with a hearing loss at any point in time. A newborn hearing screening has been phenomenal for children and families, but getting a pass result on newborn hearing screening is not a, okay, we're good to go for all time. As you'll see in the next slide, there's a number of children whose hearing changes during those preschool years. Again, as we all serve families, we know that supports for families needs to be ongoing, very individualized, provided by a team of caring people. Families are often going to experience feelings of all kinds at different times in their life, and it will cycle through. And Laura's going to talk a little bit about that as well too. And of course, families may be supported in many different ways, on many different schedules as we serve families. Okay, a little background, some of the words that we're going to use today. We'll talk about people first, children first. So we do say children who have hearing loss, children who are deaf or hard of hearing. And there's a capital D, deaf, which may really talk about cultural identity, ASL, cultural community deaf. We in Minnesota are really encouraging the use of the word hearing differences, acknowledging that we all have different abilities. We all have different ways that we're learning. So I'm going to try to use children with hearing differences. Similarly, people use hearing loss. So when we're talking about special education services, hearing loss is considered a low incidence disability within the special education law and services. Not very many of them compared to other areas of need. The prevalence is about 3 babies per 1,000 children born, but that doubles by kindergarten age to about 6 children per 1,000. So it's still maybe not a lot, but we look at that again, the children who are identified at birth might double. And we need to pick those kids up and know what their hearing is like to help support their learning. We know that about 35 to 40% of children will have additional learning challenges. Excuse me. Thus the importance of a real collaborative team for services. Just giving you an idea about numbers of children. There's about 150 newborns each year that are identified with permanent hearing loss, and an additional 100 children are identified after newborn through age 10. So again, the change and the increase in children through the preschool years, needing to speed up a little bit. The Minnesota Department of Education is the designated lead agency for Part C infant and toddler services. I know that's a little bit different in many states, but Minnesota offers support services to eligible children with special needs through the public school system at no cost to families beginning from birth to age 21. Children with hearing differences have actually been served through the public school system in Minnesota from birth on since about the 1970s, even predating some of the other early childhood programs. We have about 90 to 100 toddlers who transition at age 3 from Part C into early or childhood special ed, and about 100 to 120 preschoolers heading off to kindergarten. 4 quick highlights of just the Minnesota EHDI system. In 1998, we're starting within the school system with regional EDI teams of teachers for deaf, hard of hearing, educational audiologists, speech language pathologists, and teachers for early childhood special ed. 2007 was a big year when we had legislation for newborn hearing screening in hospitals mandated, along with reporting to Department of Health. And in that same year, there was a great deal of interagency collaboration for developing those statewide EDI systems. 2011, Anna's going to talk about a little bit more. The Minnesota Collaborative for Deaf, Blind, Hard of Hearing began with those partnerships of agencies, programs, families, adults who are deaf, hard of hearing themselves. Okay, so a quick one of those little icons here, EDI systems across the United States, kind of a check for you. Do you know how to find the EDI system people in your state? and maybe think about, well, why do I need to know that? And how might they help me support families? How do they help me support families and the connections that you have? If you don't know a contact person for your state, there's a link on this slide, and there's also the link on that resources slide. So maybe jot this down on a sticky note or your handouts to say, I need to find out this in the next 2 weeks. Okay, I am going to turn it over now to Danelle. She's going to be sharing her lived experiences as a deaf adult and as a deaf mentor in the state of Minnesota. She's the program manager of the Minnesota Deaf Mentor Family Program and shares her personal experiences with all of us. So thank you, Danelle.
Thank you very much, Kathy. It's been my pleasure to be here. Good morning, everyone. I am a deaf adult. I was born as a hearing child. Sorry about that. Oh, hello again. I am Danelle Granaris. I was born to hearing parents in central Minnesota. We lived on a dairy farm. Of course, resources in rural Minnesota are pretty limited, and our family had no history of hearing loss. At approximately 14 months, I became ill with spinal meningitis. During that time, in the process of healing, we found out that I had a hearing loss. And I'm so very proud of my big family. As you can see of the pictures here on the screen and in the crib here, that's when I was ill with the spinal meningitis, and it was terrible. They did not believe I was going to survive. Of course, I made it through, and the results was that I am now deaf. A few months later, while I was recovering, learning to walk, sit, and crawl again, at that time, I was fit with hearing aids. I met an audiologist at that time. A few months later, I started working with a speech therapist. Being in rural Minnesota, I was very, very fortunate to have all of the resources available to me when I was 2 and 3, when I started with hearing aids and speech therapy. From then on, I did struggle with therapy in the beginning. However, my parents decided to search for people to teach us some sign language. So we contacted in our public school, and we met a sign language deaf and hard of hearing teacher who was available to teach in my school, along with an interpreter. I really, really enjoyed working with her. She could sign and speak at the same time. Now, in the previous picture, you'll see there, I learned sign language and loved it. My communication with her, I had access to information, and it just took off. My speech and language teacher also worked with me at school as well as with my family. Going forward with that, until I was in middle school, we worked together. At the left side, you can see this, the picture here is my deaf and hard of hearing teacher, where I learned both speech and sign language and used them alternating in our home. So fortunately, I've always had American Sign Language as my language. unfortunately, in school, sometimes the educational system decided to cut the interpreter funding. But my parents realized that I was struggling in class because I couldn't hear what the teacher was saying with the too much background noise. So my mother advocated for me and fought to make sure I had that interpreter through all of my years in school. So I used both American Sign Language and speech and spoken English. After high school, I moved on to college at Gallaudet University. It's a private college for deaf and hard of hearing students from across the United States. All of the teachers there sign, they're deaf themselves, so access for me was 100%, and I thrived. At Gallaudet University, I received both my bachelor's degree and my master's degree. I also was fortunate to be part of the Minnesota VR services, which helped me get through those college years. With all of my team members that have supported me during my lifetime and those early years especially, deaf and hard of hearing teachers, audiologists, and my most important person, family, of course, my most important people were my family to encourage me and help me grow, which allowed me to thrive. They did wonderful work and provided me with great support. So at this time, I'm going to hand it off to Laura Godfrey. Thank you so much for listening. And here is Laura, who is a parent in Minnesota as well.
Thanks, Danelle. So good morning. My name is Laura Godfrey, and I'm the mother of a now 18-year-old who was born with a mild to severe high frequency hearing difference. Although today the hearing difference is the thing that he works through day to day. When he was born, it was a different story. My son Keaton had a stroke when he was born, and because of this, did not move his right side of his body. You can imagine, as a parent, he is my first and only child, so you can imagine how devastating that is, and that devastation it absolutely put me in a little bit of a tailspin. So I spent the first couple of years in grieving with a lot of depression. And when I look back at what I was grieving about, it really wasn't about the hearing or even the diagnosis. It was really more of like, did I as a parent do something that has caused my child to struggle? And so there was a lot of fears in those struggles and what the future might look like. And then again, my fears were really more about something I was missing. Were there questions I should be asking? Was there some therapy I should be trying? There's a great deal of control when you give up when you're working with medical specialists, and your one job as a mom is to protect that tiny baby. And so it can cause a great deal of anxiety. So if I could go back and give that young mother a little talking to and say everything's going to be fine, and to give her that crystal ball, I would definitely do that. So my son was in the NICU for a short period of time. He did have his ABRs, his auditory brainstem responses, completed in a timely manner. He actually had 3 done because, poor kid, as a mom, I just didn't see it, and I didn't realize that hearing wasn't all or nothing. And so it took me a little while to understand what frequency specific hearing loss meant. And, because he would respond to sounds. And so it just was very confusing. So I felt very grateful that he was diagnosed. He was born in 2002. And at that time they were doing newborn hearing screenings in the NICU. And I believe it was a year or 2 after that, that it became statewide. So I'm just very grateful, because it is definitely something I would not have known, and I wouldn't have noticed until some of the language concerns would have come up. So, we as having said all that, we continued all our appointments as instructed, even though I didn't quite see it. And he was fitted with his first pair of hearing aids when he was 3 weeks old. We had a deaf and hard of hearing teacher at our door when he was only 2 weeks old. And I would have never have known at that time how important my son's deaf and hard of hearing teacher would be to me. Her name was Amy, and she was just such a lifesaver and a delight. So these photos, are of the number of pictures. It's hard to see, I know, of his hearing aids. So his excitement of getting like blue hearing aids or giraffe hearing aids. And then certainly that picture, which I saw when I was looking through it, where that shows him about to take that hearing aid off his ear, which is a perpetual problem for parents with littles trying to keep technology in their ears. I still have a little bit of PTSD every time I hear that feedback coming from an unknown location. Even today when I'm at like out in public or an event, I hear that sound and I go into nobody move mode. There's a lot of money sitting in unknown territory. So that's him as a little. Do you want me to go to the next slide? So of course, my dogs have decided to bark right at this moment. My apologies. When I say it takes a village, I mean it takes a village. And I am so grateful my village was behind me and helped me through many difficult times. The first year of my son's life, he had over 120 doctor's appointments and teacher's appointments. If you think about that, that's 2 or 3 a week. And that's surrounded by the normal newborn stuff of getting them to sleep through the night and eating well. Besides the audiology appointment needs, my son was also diagnosed with cerebral palsy. And in addition to that, he had us on quite a journey to figure out some unknown diagnosis for many years. We had many appointments for casting. So if you all know, working with kids with cerebral palsy, they tend to cast their limbs to try to either stretch muscle or to create muscle memory. This one picture in the bottom shows his purple cast, and that was actually on his left hand to get him to utilize his right more. And I just think it's a funny memory that I had where he had to go back to the doctor and take the thumb off because he was a thumb sucker. And that was like, yeah, that was a terrible day of him. So there's things you learn as parents. So through the years, my son has been diagnosed with many things, speech disorders, behavioral disorders, mobility disorders, developmental disorders, and through it all, our village was with us. Special educations and their support teams will always hold a special place in my heart. These other pictures are pictures of him with his elementary special education teacher. The other pictures were of a school in Minnesota that had co-taught classrooms of kiddos that were deaf and hard of hearing and also had no hearing difference that were in the same classroom. And that was really nice because we had the supports there with the educational audiologist and the teacher of the deaf and hard of hearing and the special educators and the speech and language pathologists. And what really got me out of my depression, and again, the depression was really just more fear of the unknown, was this preschool and their early childhood classes. There's no doubt about that. Seeing other moms experience the same thing I was going through and seeing other kids with hearing aids helped me enormously. So my child, where he is now, my wild child, who is a senior in high school, is doing phenomenally. He was academically 3 years behind until around 8th grade and is now at grade level. He no longer has mobility or speech disorders. He has some mild cerebral palsy that's isolated to his right hand and wrist, and his behavioral and developmental delays are minimal. And I can't stress this enough about how this is due to his village. I couldn't have done it, and I am grateful for the supports that we've had through the years. These pictures are of him and some of our pets, and pictures of him at the zoo. But the one at the bottom right with the hedgehog and the kids laying on the floor is at a Hands and Voices event where he talked to the kids about animals, and they were waiting for his little head to pop out. And you can see Jackie in the background there, who is a deaf mentor that was all supporting these families. So he is hoping, he's applying for colleges now and is hoping to pursue a career in environmental studies. So he is doing phenomenal, and it's all due to the supports that we've had through the years. So thank you.
Thank you, Laura, very much. This is Kathy. I'm going to pop back on the screen here. And We're going to pause for just a moment and see if there's some questions in the chat for Danelle or for Laura. We're running a few minutes behind our talk, so we're going to skip our 5-minute break, but please make sure to take care of yourselves what you need. Any questions from the chat? Anna, could you maybe share some time?
Oh, hello, everybody. I'm Anna Paulson, and I just saw 2 chats from our attendees. One of them was from somebody, a teacher who has a new 3-year-old in her classroom. So thanks for coming today. I hope that we can give you some ideas on how to support that little 3-year-old. And the other one was a comment about somebody who's definitely here to get resources. So I hope that you were able through the WHOVA site to get our resources sheet. I think that that will be really helpful for you today. So I think that's all we have for questions and comments right now.
All right, good. Thank you. You can try this a little bit later. We're going to skip our break, as I said. But if you would like to, again, put a little postcard together for yourself with to-do steps, you're welcome to do that at any time. I'm going to continue on because we're going to pass it right on to Anna, again, for the next part of our talk. Thank you.
Okay, so in listening to the personal stories from Danelle and from Laura, you might wonder how that little one in your classroom or somebody that you know might go from just getting their first hearing aids or just starting to wiggle their fingers. How do they get from that point of the beginning of language all the way to what you see in these pictures or literacy? On my left side, I assume it's yours too, you'll see those 3 little guys looking at a book. Those boys most likely are bilingual, bicultural. And you're thinking maybe Hispanic or Laotian or from some other country, but really they're bilingual, bicultural by means of they are deaf. So inside they carry the culture of deafness and they're English or American, or it looks like that book is written in American English. So those little boys are reading the words on the page in English word order, and they are signing them in American Sign Language so they can get the concept in the language that potentially was their first language. The little girl on the right is using cued speech. She is using visual cues to visualize the phonemes of the English word order. She's probably monolingual. I don't know where her family roots are, but she is reading in English and using visual cues to show the phonemes of what she's reading. So they go from just babies all the way to literacy, probably before your very eyes, if as many early interventionists are in this room as I think. So go ahead and click, Kath. So you might wonder what the possible impact of hearing differences are. Hearing differences have an impact on both language and on communication. You're probably sure to understand that if you don't have access to auditory input, there is a high probability that you will have a more challenging time learning language. Language is connected to learning, cognition, ultimately to vocation. So access to language is one of the most important things that you can do for a child who has a hearing difference, either through their aids, their hearing aids, so they can use their receptive skills, or through a visual language like American Sign Language, or a visual communication system like cued speech. The other impact that hearing loss might have is access to communication or access to people, because of course, language, listening, exchanging talking, exchanging signing is how you get your own self-identity, your self-esteem, how you become connected to your people and your world. So without access to people, you also will have a more difficult time in your future years. Next slide. This is a family journey, and we did a study with Wilder Research, and documented the touch points that a family who has a child with hearing loss goes through as they are looking for the people who will lift them up, who will share their resources, share their services. They have connections to primarily, at the beginning, the hospital where they're identified. Then we recommend they go to a medical appointment or an audiologist. I did see that there is an audiologist or two in the room. You're most likely the second, maybe the third touch point in the system. We like to connect them as quickly as we can to Hands and Voices or to another parent who maybe has gone through the journey, and to our Deaf Mentor Family Program or Deaf Hard of Hearing Guide Program, where they can see a successful deaf adult, a successful hard of hearing adult, somebody who has lived this journey. So, raise the expectations, raise the wishes. Somewhere in that system, they are referred to early intervention, and that's you guys. And you're thinking, well, boy, that's a lot of people who have touched that family to that point. And there's potential for some confusion with families. So it's good to identify who you are and what skill set you bring. And then, of course, at that point, there could be two teachers, the early interventionist ECSE and the early interventionist who has a skill set specific to the kids who are deaf, hard of hearing, or a teacher deaf, hard of hearing. So that journey is a very complex journey in some states. In our state, we have really worked to streamline it, to offer coordinated care. We have really tried to work to raise the families up with support without increasing confusion. Next. Right away, we talk about the importance of language and communication. Right away, the first thing you want to think about is, how is that child going to develop language? How are they going to communicate? And I want you to notice that on our slide, it says communication opportunities, not options. It is an option. The family will eventually have to make some decisions on what the primary or secondary communication modes are for the child. But each one is an opportunity to see what works best for the child, what works best for the family. You have to consider the child. Are they physically mobile? How's their vision? How much hearing do they have? The family, is the family from another country? Do they have a home language that they want the child to participate in? What's the long-term plan for this little baby? What's their hearing level? What additional challenges do they have? 40% of our children who are deaf or hard of hearing have an additional challenge or an additional disability. What is the child's culture going to be? Will they be the first culturally deaf person in that family? Will they be able to carry that identity? Who are their language models? Do they have a deaf neighbor? Maybe somebody in their school who already uses ASL? Their local resources, and of course, the motivation of the family. I've listed the communication opportunities down below. I'm guessing you know most of them: American Sign Language, cued speech, listening and spoken language, tactile ASL for a child that might be deaf with vision issues as well, or another communication system for a child who maybe needs a communication box or text to picture systems. This is one of our favorite Minnesota slides, and you notice that we have it under topic and resource in the side panel. But this is who is surrounding the family. Parent-to-parent support. There are formal supports in that area, and there's informal supports like the grandparents or the aunties, the neighbors. There's information certainly on websites and apps, but there's also information that the teacher needs to bring to the child. There's their existing communities, and I'm guessing they're going to expand their horizons into some new communities, some communities where their children also have a child with hearing loss. There's that long list of professionals. You guys all know who you are. And really important for the child's identity is getting that deaf or hard of hearing role model, that deaf hard of hearing guide, those people that will show them that they're not the only ones that wear little hearing aids, or have a different communication system. Next. In Minnesota, we developed this brochure that is also on a website that goes out to families. This is a tool that ECSE teachers, teachers of the deaf, hard of hearing, parent-to-parent support, deaf mentors, people all like this particular roadmap. It gives the parents an opportunity to write out who is coming to the home, to write out what's their role, how do they fit into this puzzle with my child. Like Laura said, there were a lot of people in and out of little Keaton's life, and she really had to focus on how to manage all those people and how to get the best out of them. So this is just a tool that maybe your own state has one, or maybe you'd like to develop one for your state. And then I was designated to be the one to talk about scope creep. I think that is really a difficult topic because everybody comes with a variety of skills and knowledge sets. Some of you are multi-licensed. Some of you administrators have had years of experience in one area or another. But if you can take it from the perspective of the parent, they are expecting that the people who come into their home have a specific reason, maybe a specific license or credential, and a specific purpose. So when you start creeping into other people's scope of service delivery, the parent might get a little confused on why you're here and what you're doing. That's not to say that you can't answer their questions or be an additional resource, but you might want to let them know who is the expert, who is bringing their best self to your house today. What is the skill set you can count on from that person? And what's the skill set you might reach to another professional to gain? So do a little self-check when you go in. What's your purpose? What can you offer as far as additional resource? And where do you reach to the next professional? Kathy mentioned the collaborative plan. That's a Minnesota thing. And I know that some other states have started, maybe not with the same terminology, but the collaborative plan was really born out of the need for agencies and organizations to come together to decide what resources we're all have in front of us, what services do we have, where's the gaps. So coming together, we have a 50 stakeholder group that comes together about 4 times a year and aligns their services, aligns their resources, and makes some future plans where they can make some systemic change together. Go to that website. We've done a lot of really cool things together. One thing that might really be impressive to you is that we had a memorandum of understanding signed from our Department of Health, because that's our early identification lead in our state, Eddie Lead, with the Department of Education. And because universal newborn hearing screening was launched in Minnesota in 2007, we can now see how the child's early identification impacted their test scores in the 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. So we're able to really show legislators and policymakers and people who provide funding how that early identification, that early money made an impact later in the years. Lots of other resources came with the collaborative plan too. I'll just refer you to your resource guide. And this is the last thing I just wanted to share with you, that we posted some impact stories. We would call them TED Talks, but that is a, copyrighted word, TED Talks. But we have some of the people who worked in the collaborative plan, who worked together for years. You'll notice that Gina, the interpreter on the screen, is also the interpreter in the TED Talks. Kind of fun. Anyways, they tell their story on how working together as a community supported children and the outcomes, their improved outcomes. So just one more resource for you. Thanks. I am now going to turn it back to Kathy to talk about screening.
All right, thank you. This is Kathy again, and I'm going to share a little bit about the Department of Health as an organization, as an agency in Minnesota, and their supports for children and families. As you think back on that journey map That's one of the first dots, is children and families experience that newborn hearing screening and follow-up diagnostic testing to establish what their hearing is like. So I'm going to share just a little bit about Department of Health with you today. If I can get it to click. The Department of Health has oversight over the hearing screening system for newborns and older students and provide a wealth of information to medical providers, clinical audiologists, screeners, the systems organization of the medical screening. There is one document I'm going to highlight here on this slide for you, and that is the one in the middle, Guidelines for Hearing Screening After the Newborn Period to Kindergarten Age. There's 2 sections in that document that gives technical information for all kinds of hearing screening after newborn. So again, that monitoring through the early childhood years. But because the educational system is involved in Part C very directly in Minnesota, as well as early childhood special ed, 3 to 5-year-olds, there's 2 sections in that recommendation document, guidelines. One that is specific to monitoring, documenting the hearing status through objective means for all children who are referred for Part C evaluations or are receiving Part C, and the same for those children who are referred to Part B, those 3 to 5-year-olds. And how do we document, as we are required to do, how do we document hearing status for children who are receiving our services or referred? So I'll just want to point those out to you as one of the resources that Department of Health has created in collaboration with other agencies as well. The newborn hearing screening people at Department of Health also have a number of guidance documents for best practices for medical providers and clinical audiologists. So if that's your thing and you're here looking for resources along with EHDI, that would be a great resource for you to check out too. There is a number of them that have been developed over the years and are on a cycle to update as well. One of the resources that I particularly like, very simple, all of our clinical audiologists new to the state get this in their licensure packet. It's shared widely. It's a poster. It's a small poster, then with information follows, but it tells clinical audiologists their very important role in this system to report hearing screening and diagnostic results to Department of Health. They are to refer children to Part C infant and toddler intervention services, and that's done through a website primarily. And they are to connect families to Minnesota Hands and Voices, because in our system, Minnesota Hands and Voices has been contracted and designated to make those first calls with families so that families get that connection from another parent to check in. How are you doing? What do you need? And help make those other connections to early intervention services and resources. 2 resources that I'll highlight that Department of Health provides for families. One of them is a binder. It's called What You Need to Know, Resources for Families. It is a physical, large 3-ring binder with paper information that's mailed out to families of newly identified children. You can see what's in that binder by clicking on, in the resource section, you can click on the link, the hyperlink there, and you can see all the information that's been collected by, again, the interagency partners and organizations as a beginning resource, not the whole thing. It's like, here's some things to start and know that there are people and organizations to help. The other resource that's very key in our system is a book called Understanding Your Child's Hearing Loss, a Guide for Parents, a Minnesota edited version of that. This is a book, the original is from North Carolina Beginnings Organization for Children who are deaf or hard of hearing. the Department of Health has collaborated with the North Carolina Beginnings program to allow us, through the contract, to add Minnesota-specific resources and information to that book. So when children are newly diagnosed with that hearing loss, hearing difference, the clinical audiologist can give this book to the families. So they walk out of the office with a resource to start with some information about a lot of different topics within this one book. And they don't have to go home and just try to Google. So these are two important resources from Department of Health. As I said, that then the Department of Health has contracted with Minnesota Hands and Voices to help those first connections and supports to family. So I'm going to turn it back over to Laura, and she'll share a little bit more about the Minnesota Department of Health, Doug, Minnesota Hands and Voices. Thanks, Laura.
Thanks, Gabby. Just some real quick background on myself. I went into zoology as a degree, and when my son was born, sometime around when he was 3 years old, I came across this organization, Minnesota Hands and Voices, and I just was like, what is this about? And then when they had an open position, I jumped on it because I thought this is a way for me to give back so that I can help families not be stuck at the beginning, that I can give them that crystal ball that I wished I had. So I've been with Minnesota Hands and Voices now for 14 years, and I'm now the director, and I have just gained so much knowledge, and I'm so grateful for this organization. Minnesota, there are 48 chapters within the United States and Canada. Each chapter is built on their own, so it varies different on how much resources they have to provide. But I would definitely look into that. We are our Guide by Your Side program embodies strong value of direct peer connection and networking. It promotes self-efficiency and hinders isolation by exploring, the common bonds that we have and our shared experiences. Our primary focus with Minnesota Hands and Voices is to meet families where they're at in their journeys. And that can vary, as you all know, with a family and where they're at and how quickly they are to do something. Our mission statement talks a lot about supporting families without bias. And what this means for us is that it means that we don't push one methodology or another. It means that we help families know all the options that are out there, help them find the resources if they choose one path or another, and support them in their choice. We have 20 different staff members located throughout the state of Minnesota, and they all have different experiences, and what worked for their child is what makes the choices that they've made right. So we aren't experts, but we have shared experiences that we help families with. Next slide. So within our chapter, we have what we call our Guide by Your Side programs, and that includes parent guides, ASTRA guides, and deaf and hard of hearing guides. ASTRA standing for Advocacy, Support, and Training. We also have, within our parent guides, we have cultural guides. So we have a Hmong, a Spanish, and a Somali parent guide to help meet families where they're at in their journey. Let's see, next slide. Oh, it's going to come slow. Okay, I forgot I did this. Okay, so so our parent guides, as Kathy mentioned, our funding comes through the Minnesota Department of Health. And as such, we get referrals for families that have newly diagnosed children. About 60% of these kiddos are newborns, and about 40% are over the age of 2. So as it was mentioned earlier in our presentation, the hearing part can pop up at any time, whether it was a late diagnosis or a late onset, it just varies. And our parent guides reach out. We start with phone calls. The hope is, of course, that we do home visits. Of course, with COVID, that has not been possible. We reach out to them at various points in time. And I say one of the questions that was put in the chat was that that they have families with hearing loss that aren't ready for a cochlear implant or hearing aids. And what do you think would help us in encouraging them to follow through with the recommendations of using these devices? And one of the things our parent guides do is that they spend a lot of time doing things, working with motivational interviewing, having the families tell them what are they hearing, meeting them where they're at. Some families might be looking, they might have issues with finding a home or getting financial resources that may or may not be due to the child's hearing. And so we really start at the basics and make sure that they have the core stuff before they can move on to the next. The other thing is a lot of times families are working with multi-generational homes. And so they may not be making that decision, whereas the grandparents might. So working with them where they're at, helping them to talk with other parents so that they can, like, for example, I might talk with, meet with a family and talk with them about what they're hearing. What are you hearing from the audiologist? What are they telling you? How are you feeling about that? Because there may be a barrier in there that has nothing to do with the hearing part. It might be something going on with the family. And man, I tell you, cat now. And so I would say, some of the experiences, I'm sorry, I got distracted by my cat. So I would say having them work with another family, whether you have a Hands and Voices chapter in your state or another parent that might be a good role model for that family, helping them understand the technology, what the technology felt like to see on your child, the process of the medical process, yeah, sorry. Yeah, okay. Let's go on to the next, I'm sorry. So our parents work really hard to meet families where they're at. And one of the other areas that we have is deaf and hard of hearing guides. And they're all successful individuals who come from different backgrounds. They've attended different educational settings. They utilize different technology. Some have life experiences like late deafened or are deafblind themselves. Our deaf and hard of hearing guides can meet families again where they're at. They can go to their homes or their schools. Right now, we're really pushing virtual meetings. They've put together really fun YouTube videos, different lessons on, how something worked for them, their personal story about, for example, a captioned telephone, different communication language videos. So really the benefit of having a deaf and hard of hearing guide, or if your state doesn't have deaf and hard of hearing guides, reaching out, finding if they have a deaf mentor program, finding a role model so that families and the children can see successful adults doing what they want. And it's extremely powerful. So really the idea is to bring the family a perspective of not loss, but of optimism, to share through personal experiences and, to create a safe space so that parents can ask questions. Next slide. Our educational advocacy, the purpose is just to make sure that families understand the basic components of educational advocacy for their children. We give each of them an educational advocacy book, and that is written by National Hands and Voices and is specific to understanding the nuances of deaf education and some of the things that families may need to think about for how an IEP or an IFSP is written. Our Astra guides can go into, meetings that we tend to, at this point in time, just are note takers, and then we will circle back with the family and help them to process what it is that they experienced. We do statewide events to further training in educational advocacy. And there's one-on-one consultations with a staff to help them go through this process, which is extremely daunting. It's one thing to have a child with quote unquote a disability, but then, then you're stepping into the educational system, and it's a lot. So next slide. And of course, I don't need to tell all of you, because I know, whether you're talking about hearing loss or something else, just connecting another family with another family who's shared that same experiences, there's reduced feelings of isolation, it increases your understanding, it helps you feel confident in jumping into something like cued speech or ASL that maybe you didn't think was the path you were going to take that path, but being able to see individuals actively using that form of communication is extremely powerful. So certainly it helps the child know that they're not the only ones. As you all know, as you live in rural areas or in greater Minnesota, it's possible to become a little more isolated. Next slide. And then some of the materials that Kathy mentioned, we will walk through these with a family. As you know, there's a lot of information out there. I know when my son was born, it was really the internet, which was, freaky. And I'm grateful these materials exist. So we will make sure that families have them. We make sure they understand what the use for them is. We will walk through different sections at different times when working with families. For example, the beginnings book, we might jump right to an audiogram. How do you understand your child's hearing? What is the audiologist telling you about your child's hearing? And this will help as a starter point, because as you remember, my story was, I didn't realize that hearing was an all or nothing, which seems silly, but we start there. So that's one place. The MDH binder has different sections in there. The intention of that is to put all of the medical documents you get from doctors or from educational professionals in there, so that it's all in one section, so you can go back and reference it. We also send out our own new parent packet, which includes our newsletters, information about communication opportunities, more information about what Hands and Voices is and how we can support them. And certainly when we did do virtual events or virtual in-person visits, we were able to give gifts to the kids, kind of a welcome to the community present. And one of it was blankets that are made by community partners, and then Build-A-Bears, and we have them with hearing aids and cochlears and Baha or no technology, whatever it is that the family relates to. Next slide. And this is just a final thought. I really encourage you. You can certainly email me at any time, but I would look to see if your state has a chapter and know what it is that they do, because they can really help facilitate some of these questions that you might have, or who does what or when. Help support families by meeting where they're at. Help them find resources, whether it be educational or financial. We work a lot with social emotional needs with our community, and making sure that they have the resources that they need. Next chapter or next. All right, so I'm going to hand it over to Danelle.
Thank you, Laura. So I'm the manager of the Deaf Mentor Family Program in Minnesota. And as I mentioned, all of the support that I received growing up in my younger years really inspired me to become a deaf mentor. So with the Deaf Mentor Program, it is a statewide program. We serve families throughout the state of Minnesota. And what we focus on is facilitating early language through ASL instruction, and then also valuable insights on the social, emotional, and behavior development of children who are deaf and hard of hearing. So the goal of our mentoring program is to actually work with the families to improve their child's access to language, specifically ASL, but also connecting the families with the deaf community. Most of our referrals that we receive, 50% of those come from Minnesota Hands and Voices. Obviously, they talk about our programs as one of their critical resources. And if the family expresses interest, then they will make contact, and then they're able to apply to be a part of our program. Another 30% come referred by our deaf and hard of hearing teachers that are working in ECSE or early childhood. And then the other part of the referrals come from various agencies, can be social workers, can be friends of friends, or they have found us on the website. So while our program focuses on American Sign Language, of course, we support the family if they are wanting to add other types of communication opportunities, such as cued speech or speech therapy. So we like to connect our families to the deaf community, and so that they're also able to learn more about deaf culture. What we do is the family becomes a part of our program for 2 years. We meet with them once a week. Obviously, with the pandemic that's upon us, we teach virtually, or we will meet with them virtually. Once the pandemic resolves, hopefully we're able to go back to home visits. We follow and use the Deaf Mentor curriculum. And the curriculum actually was founded by the Sky High Research Center at Utah State University. And that happened in 1997. So they took on some research to see how it was mentors could support families. That involved the Deaf Mentor Project. So that research is published, and where it's published is the Deaf Experimental Project for young deaf children and their families, and it's published in the American Annals of the Deaf, volume 143, if you're curious. And then I believe you can find it on the website as well. The Sky High Deaf Mentor curriculum is the only curriculum that is an evidence-based curriculum that has been established in the United States and around the world. And it's evidence-based because it does show that having deaf mentors a part of a family while they are going through their journey, providing them support, life experiences, cultural knowledge, and history throughout the years that they're a part of this program, it's been known and shown that the deaf and hard of hearing child develops language and vocabulary and skills that thrive much more than a family that may not be a part of that program. So it has been shown, and the evidence is there, that there is benefit to this program for families that choose to be a part of it. And again, that's shown through the Sky High curriculum. Again, I was very fortunate to have all of what we see here on this slide for myself to become a leader. Having full access to the language and the setting around you, whether it is spoken, and they have residual hearing to be 100% part of the setting that they are in, having family involvement, having language models, deaf mentors being a part of the life, and coming into the home to support the family throughout their journey. Teachers and deaf mentors do set the bar high for expectations, because we do know that deaf and hard of hearing children can thrive. And of course, friends and community offering support helps deaf and hard of hearing children to feel included. And of course, it's imperative for them to feel that way. So I have deaf mentors. We have a total of 25 of them throughout the state of Minnesota. If you're wondering what they do, they first are language models. They are well-adjusted deaf adults. They understand how to adapt to the mainstream environment. They are storytellers, and they're fierce advocates for deaf and hard of hearing children to work and interact with them so that they are able to thrive. They guide, they coach, and provide most everything they can to meet the level of support that the family needs. Part of their role, of course, is going into the home, teaching and interacting, can be an ASL. They also will teach sign language to the family. And they'll review goals of the session. So once they've come into the home, they've prepared and discussed a lesson plan it's based off of the Sky High curriculum. They'll discuss goals, they'll review that with the family, and they will also include, if the family has something else that they would like to learn, they'll include that in the lesson plan. Our deaf mentors also will collaborate and work as a team with other deaf and hard of hearing teachers, or those that are also a part of the team that are providing services for the family. So of course, we're providing and want to be a part of the whole team so that everybody is providing all of the support that they can for the deaf and hard of hearing child. As I mentioned earlier, we have 25 deaf mentors throughout the state. And we're always making sure that we're covering the whole area. Even though we have families that may live 2 hours away or may live more rural than another one, we do have mentors that are willing to drive out to their homes. And then we also have 5 mentors that come from diverse backgrounds. 2 of them are Hispanic. We have another 2 that are Hmong, and then we have an African American deaf mentor. And those 5 are available so that they're able to meet the cultural needs of a family, so that they're able to feel supported and create a stronger bond with the deaf mentor to understand their experiences coming from the same background. Typically, those mentors come from the Twin Cities area, but they are able to meet maybe one time in greater Minnesota. They'll find those that have a common background, common ethnicity, and we'll try to meet those families as well. This is the slide that you see here is an example of a session that happens. So of course, as I mentioned, they are there to teach, but they're also there to guide and shadow the parents. So we always foster the parents to develop their communication with their child. So we try to teach them the language so that they then can communicate with their child. So this is a picture of where you see a guide or a mentor that is watching or coaching a parent during a session and hoping that they're signing the correct signs and such. As I mentioned earlier, we like to be team workers so that we're able to provide the best for the deaf and hard of hearing child. So these, what you see listed here are the agencies that we collaborate with. These are agencies that can attend meetings, that can review and develop goals so that we're providing a language development in ASL for the deaf and hard of hearing child. Parents often mention how overwhelmed the internet, resources, and the wealth of information that they receive, that it's hard for them to figure out which path to take or where to start. What we do with our families throughout the 2 years is we like to give them time to process all of the resources. And we also have all of that in our parent packet. The parent packet looks like a flyer, and it will list all of the resources that throughout time we'll go through that list and we'll elaborate and explain on what specific resources they might be curious about, or we'll give them a general idea. So we like to open up that discussion with them so they are aware of what available resources are out there. So that way we're continuously providing that support for the family in every phase of their child's life. How our deaf mentors and how our program is funded is it is funded by the Minnesota Department of the Commission division. So it's the Minnesota Department of Commission for Deaf, Blind, and Hard of Hearing Individuals. We've lobbied for a policy to be established. It was passed. Then we sought out mentors to be a part of the program. Correction, it's funded by DHHSD. Thank you. And that concludes my portion for this presentation. I believe next slide would like to just let you know that if you're curious or wondering about the Sky High curriculum, or you have a program in your state, You can look at the Sky High Deaf Mentor website, and it's there that you can find out if your state has a program or is able to collaborate with your state to develop a better program for the deaf and hard of hearing children in your state. Questions I can answer for anybody?
Thank you, Danelle. I think in the interest of time here, we're going to save our question time for the end. Continue to ask in the chat. We will try to answer as we can in the chat. We're going to try to keep a little bit of time for us as we finish today. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the next point in the journey and that connection to early intervention services. In Minnesota, it's through the public school system and as well as other private organizations or services as the family needs. Why we're doing this again, it is all about the brain, all of it. Language development is key. There are multiple ways that children with hearing differences communicate. There's no one right way for all children, but we need to ensure that the language is getting to that child's brain and the family is supported to provide great language, great learning environments with our goal of being kiddos head off to kindergarten with that full language. I'm going to go kind of fast, so please connect with me later if you like. But again, the early intervention system is very family focused. It's supporting the families with coaching and resources and services to help their students and their children. Primary website for getting into the services, referred to the services, as well as information for families is Help Me Grow Minnesota. We do follow children along the way, and we have also developed a fairly robust way of collecting outcomes data for children who are deaf, hard of hearing, children with hearing differences as they transition at 3, and again as they head off to kindergarten. We're trying again this year. It's under updating and review for how can we continue to do that more. A couple of resources I will highlight with you because oftentimes early interventionists wonder about eligibility. So there are a couple documents there about eligibility for children in Minnesota with hearing differences. Basically babies, toddlers under the age of 3, if you have any confirmed permanent hearing loss, you're in. We want the services to be supportive, not fall behind, but we're giving you and the families those supports that they need to help the child grow. The first one, Part C, the collaborative practices, really reinforces that idea of we need the village, we need a team full of very skilled and knowledgeable people in many areas, including those professionals who have specific knowledge and background in deaf, hard of hearing. For those of you who are providing services, I encourage you to try to look at this Part C service coordinators or providers checklist. We have developed this as really a discussion tool that you can know some of those things that are important to ask. It follows really our sequence of services and supports for families along that Minnesota journey, and making sure that families have gotten the resources that are out there that we've developed. They've gotten those connections to Hands and Voices or the Minnesota Deaf Mentor Family Program, and they have some beginning information that we can help them on that journey in early intervention. The Parent's Guide to Deaf, Hard of Hearing Early Intervention Recommendations would be an important one to share with families and with yourselves as providers that reflects the Joint Commission on Infant Hearing, Joint Committee on Infant Hearing, a national recommendation organization that has put out statements for several years, but this one specifically was summarized for families out of a big professional document about what are those recommendations. how should we be providing services from screening all the way through early intervention. And I've included as a handout linked to this conference a graphic from Boys Town National Research Hospital that they've allowed me to use that really summarizes, okay, what are those key components of early intervention services that are good for all kids, and then some specifics for children who have hearing differences as well. We're talking about early identification, use of hearing technology, a focus on language, a support for that team of people, ongoing documentation of hearing loss, ongoing teaming and assessments of where we are. So I hope that's helpful to you as just kind of a quick summary. Here you'll notice that icon of maybe a to-do list and some questions there for you to consider for yourself about, do you know the early intervention services and how those are provided in your state? Do you know how to reach people specifically for those services for children with hearing differences? Do you have those specialists on your teams that can help provide that specific skill and information and support to children and families? And you know, or would you like to access more information and professional development specific to children with hearing differences? So those might be things to put on your sticky note or a note on your handout that you would want to do in the next couple of weeks. We'd be happy to help you with that. Just connect with us after this session. And now Anna is going to try to wrap us up here to talk about, here's the journey. Where have we been and where are we going next?
Okay, I'm actually going to power through these. So interpreter prepare, because we want enough time to get some questions and answers done. So this is the journey map that I showed you earlier. I think that you have the opportunity today to learn about the screening process, family to family connect, adult role models and ASL opportunities, early intervention, and then statewide collaboration. I think that if you really think about what's in our state, what have we provided to families, and if there's something missing, how do I get that something available to families? Go ahead and switch, Kath. So we're going to review all of this. What we really want to talk about is that as early interventionists or administrators, it's really your opportunity to be sure that families understand the importance of the early years, understand that there are people who are skilled and eager to support through their process, and most importantly, that their decision is fluid. Some families start committed to listening and spoken language and the technology, the amplification. And some families change their mind, maybe at 2 years old, 3 years old, some families much even later. So just know that the decision is fluid and that there are systems of support willing to jump in at any point for the child. I think you can read the key takeaways. So I'm not going to go ahead and review every one of them. I just want to review that in this session, we covered topics of information that we know that you as early interventionists will come across if a child with a hearing difference comes into your classroom. You know already that the family is the most important piece in that child's life. And if you can educate the family to maintain an open environment of communication and a good listening or visual language environment, that they'll continue that work throughout the week. That there are lots of partners, and there are ways, I'm flying all over here. Any partner organizations, I know Kathy and Danelle and Laura each gave you a link to a national clearinghouse so you can find where your support systems are in your state. And go ahead. And the informational resources, mostly your EDI partners, your early hearing detection and intervention. We say EDI all the time, but I just want to give you something to Google in your state. And then, of course, encouragement to select 2 resources. What did you come out with today that you can use in your next weeks, either with a family, with a student, or just to put in your toolbox? I know that I read a statistic once that a pediatrician sees a child with a hearing loss once in 5 years. So it's a low incidence disability. I'm not sure how frequently you come across a family with a diagnosis of hearing loss, but it could pop up at any moment, and certainly you want your toolbox ready. So Kathy's going to quick tell you what's in your handouts, and then we'll have, I think, about 5 minutes left for question and answer.
Yes. Thank you, Anna. This is just, again, a reminder that there's a links to all of these websites and resources that we've discussed in the presentation. So you can download that from this session on the conference website. So you can look at that. The computer is not always, there we go. So we wanted to just take some time to chat or ask questions, ideas that came to you during our presentation, maybe 1 or 2 aha moments for you today. So we're going to take a couple minutes to think about that and respond to your thoughts in the chat. And while you are reading and posting some things in the chat, again, think about an action or 2 that you would like to take in the next couple weeks. Something that you want to learn about, a resource or 2 that you want to use. I'm going to see if Laura and Anna, I've been monitoring the chat. Perhaps Anna, if you can look at the chat and see and share with us some of people's thoughts.
Yeah, thanks. My chat box is over here, so sorry that I'm looking away. But Stacy said that she thinks everyone needs to become familiar with programs in the state, always share information with each other and families. The more communication and knowledge among professionals, the better. And with support families, and will support families so much more, because that means that they're getting more resources. So don't be afraid to seek support from the deaf and hard of hearing community. And I know Stacy, and I know that she is a successful deaf adult, and so she speaks from her own inner lens that she is happy to support families if she's reached out to. I know I responded to a question from an early interventionist about how to make sure that a family has, what was the question? If it's their responsibility to refer a family for technology or ASL information, and you certainly can. I would suggest that you connect with your teacher, deaf, hard of hearing, because that person probably has a long list of resources that they can draw from, and they might have some extra tools in their toolbox for discussing the opportunities with families. I think
this is Kathy, if I can ask one. I know that there was one question previously from the chat from a participant asking about information to share with families who may not be as enthusiastic about cochlear implants or hearing aids or wearing them. And I think was Laura was talking to. I would just add one, and this resource we did not talk about, but it is in your resource list, is a website called hearingfirst.org. That is a website that is full of information and resources specific to listening and spoken language, and really brings that connection between listening with technology, language, literacy, and the importance of that everyday conversation and communication, getting the brain going early on. So that might be a resource to help, along with the comments that Laura made. It's just said, let's just find out where the family is and what are those needs, even broader than just the hearing that may be impacting that family that we can support. So thanks, Laura and Anna. Were there other comments?
Nope, this is Anna, and I haven't seen any additional information in the chat box. So,
okay. Well, we have about 1 minute left. I'm willing to stay online for a few minutes more if people would like to add in other chats or comments. But if not, we thank you very much for your attention and for participating today. Here's our contact information on the last slide. And we look forward to connecting with you again following this conference. So please reach out. Maybe if my participant presenters would like to come back on screen.
Good job.
Okay, we'll watch the chat here. I'm seeing a chat that say thanks to Britt, who is our host with the DEC conference. We really appreciate your being here to help us. And Kelly, a tech person from Minnesota who helped with this webinar as well. There is one chat says we use the Rossetti as an assessment tool because it breaks down in 3-month increments. Does anyone know if there's an ASL assessment tool that breaks down in detail like the Rossetti? The only one closer is the VCSL, but it starts 0 to 12 months. I'm going to turn that to
That's the best.
is our experts in VCSL.
Yes, the VCSL, yes, is highly recommended because it is research-based, yes.
Danelle, the commenter is saying though too, is there something that breaks it down more by months within that 0 to 12 month time of development?
No, there isn't. And not that specific, no. You can use, you could do another inventory checklist, but nothing that breaks it down like that in those months' time.
Thank you for the question. I guess another message. Okay. All right. Well, it is 12:17. Our time has passed here. Thank you very much. For those of you who watched even over your lunchtime with the different time zones, please give us connect with us via email, and we'll be happy to share more with you. We look forward to, if you try some of these resources and you found them helpful, I would love to hear that from you too, or how you have possibly modified them in some way. But we really hope that you found the information and resources of help to you today as you support families. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.